Hot Apostle. Help us build the kingdom. Like, share, and subscribe. Hello and good day from beautiful Bay St. Louis, Mississippi. Praised be Jesus Christ, always be praised, and Hail Mary. So we celebrated Mother's Day last Sunday, and so just a quick word of thanks to all the moms out there in the world. Happy Mother's Day, the gift of life that you have given. I pray for your children. I pray for you, all of you moms, and thank you. I think about my own mom, and I am grateful for the gift of life that she gave to me. Today, I want to talk just about, most of the time, a little bit about moms, maybe later, but mostly it's going to be about our new Pope, Pope Leo XIV. And, I've been asked quite a few times, what do I think of the new Pope? And I'm going to borrow a little bit from a priest named Father Gonzalez as I answer you. But also, these are my thoughts and kind of just mingling in with some of the things that he wrote down. My secretary and I were having this very exact conversation the other day. What do you think of the new Pope? And my answer was, I'm hopeful. That's the shortest answer. I'm hopeful. And then I thought a little bit about the definition of what hope is. Hope is a theological virtue. Hope is given to us by God. Hope enables us to trust in God and eternal life, and that God is going to see us through any challenge, trial, difficulty. And it's not by our effort, it's by God's grace that God will lead us. Not that we don't have to make an effort, but ultimately it doesn't depend on us. It depends on the strength that God provides. St. Paul would say, when I am weak, then I am strong. I depend on the grace of God. So hope is a gift of grace that sees us through difficulties, and it also gives us a kind of peace, a peaceableness about the circumstances and situation. It sustains us in trials. It anchors us in our trust of God. It's a kind of faith. And so I was thinking about my answer. How do you feel about Pope Leo XIV? And my answer, my kind of, gut instinct reaction was, I'm hopeful. And I am hopeful. But even more than that. And whether this is helpful or whether this is healthy, I can't say, but I'm just going to be honest with you. Maybe not, honest might not be the right word. I want to always be honest with you, maybe transparent. Frankly, I'm optimistic. It's maybe a little more human hopefulness. I have a sense of goodness, and I have been candid somewhat in the past about my relationship with Pope Francis, in the sense that, he was oftentimes a chore, not just for me, but for many priests. I would say perhaps for most priests, because we spent a lot of time trying to figure out exactly what he's saying. Well, Leo XIV, he has a degree in mathematics. And I just had this conversation the other day with somebody who was an accountant, and they were expressing their appreciation of math in general and accounting. And I was thinking what a trial accounting would be for me. I mean, it just is. And their particular love for accounting, their particular love for mathematics was that it all adds up, that it's black and white, that you can eliminate the gray. And, and there is a part of me that really appreciates that kind of exactness. I appreciate exactness in many things. And to the degree that it's possible, I appreciate the exactness that we can have even in sacred science, in theology, understanding there's always room for mystery. But I found it hopeful that Leo has his undergraduate degree in mathematics, which would say to me he has an appreciation of the need for clarity, for exactness when exactness is possible. Now, getting back to kind of my paraphrasing of myself in my conversation with the secretary here, Annette, she asked me what I think of the Pope and my hopefulness, but also that we need to give him some time. We need to come to know who he is. So, he is the 267th successor of St. Peter, the vicar of Christ. We owe him filial piety and obedience. We should pray for him. We should fast for him. We should offer masses up for him. We should pray that God would help him and strengthen him, and that we would see the Holy Father as a earthly link, a living link to Jesus Christ, the vicar of Christ. When Christ says, I'm going to give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven, what you bind on earth is bound in heaven. There is that connectedness to the reign of God that is present here on earth through the office of Peter. And my brothers and sisters, we need to be very careful in these days. In these days of social media, in these days of clicks and likes and everybody wanting to kind of have a following or make a splash, we need to be exceedingly careful because there are diabolical, and what does that word mean, diabolical? Diabolical is one of those words we use to describe the evil one, the Satan, the divider. That's what it means to divide, to separate. When Jesus is giving, or St. Paul, I should say, is giving lists of his sins, one of the sins that he gives is these divisions, these little groups, these little sects that divide themselves up. So we have to be very careful in these days, particular, not to allow secular, unbelieving, anti-Catholic, or even Catholic schismatic or Catholic, negativity to poison our heart toward a man that really we don't know. He's going to have his life history. He's going to have things that he said and places that he has taken a stand, and we're going to have to let him grow into his role as the universal leader of the church. It is the essence of the diabolical to divide, to create factions. And it is for us at this point to reserve any judgment, frankly, and to be filled with hope. Optimism is something you can take or leave. It's not necessarily a virtue, optimism. It can make people more pleasant, frankly, but to be a realist and to be hopeful in every circumstance. What I've seen so far from Pope Leo XIV is it reinforces my initial immediate impression. And I don't know how to describe myself exactly. A traditionalist, I think so. I like order. I like clarity. I think that one of the one of the greatest problems that the church had is this idea that somehow change and making things easier or relaxing disciplines and those kind of things was going to somehow make the church more attractive or draw people in, when it has proven to be exactly the wrong formula. That people like order, they like continuity, they like clarity. Of course, we have to adapt. Of course, we have to understand the circumstances of our time and place. But there are timeless truths. There is black and white. There is beautiful liturgy. There is, good order. And those things draw people in. And so that's how I would describe myself. And when I look at our new Holy Father, I'm not asking him to be exactly like me, but what I want for him to be is somebody that is going to draw the disillusioned back, to give order and clarity where there is confusion and disorder. And I am truly optimistic that that's going to be the case. Do I expect there to be a magic wand that waves over the church over the next 2 weeks? Of course not. Of course not. But do I hope that there is a kind of a gradual building, and as he finds gets his feet under him, Christ offers us eternal life in his providence, and he's given us the gift of the church. I hope that you all were heartened by the process of the election of the Pope. In a world that wants everything to be dramatic, in a world that wants everything to be kind of politicized, how orderly and how smooth and how quick, frankly, and how kind of what a great consensus, 2/3 of the cardinals from all over the world, and then to elect an American, and there's always been this idea that an American can never be the Pope, and I know he has dual citizenship and those things, but I think a great sense of unity in a world that, again, is so often divided by the evil one. So that's what I think. What do you think? And I would say what we think doesn't really matter too much, but what we're called to is we are called to pray. A couple years ago, I did a consecration. Consecrated myself to St. Joseph. And I've consecrated myself to the Blessed Mother. I've consecrated myself to St. Joseph. We had just a thing here in the parish, people consecrating themselves to the Blessed Sacrament. Just kind of taking some time and a special devotion to a particular, a person or spirituality or making a special study. Nonetheless, when I did my consecration to St. Joseph, one of the recommendations was to read a biography of St. Joseph. And so I read this biography, and the guy who begins the biography is like, well, how do you have a biography of St. Joseph? He didn't say anything. What can we do? How can you write an entire book? Well, and one of the things that he did was he explored what was Nazareth like around the year, 0, around that transition between BC and AD. What was Nazareth like? What would a typical Jewish carpenter, worker's life have been like? And to explore those things and to take the kind of look into what facts we had. Well, what do we know about Pope Leo the 14th right now? We know about him is a little bit about, his name was Robert Francis Prevost or Prevost. Or, I looked it up. How do you pronounce it? They gave us the French definition, the American, not definition, how to. But, so Robert Francis Prevost. And where his roots, here we are, I'm talking to you in Bay St. Louis, Mississippi, 60 miles from New Orleans. And he has roots in New Orleans. Born in Chicago in 1955, his father, Louis, was of French and Italian descent with roots tracing to Italy and France, obviously. And then his mother, Mildred Martinez, of Louisiana Creole heritage with Afro-Haitian and Spanish ancestry in New Orleans' 7th Ward. So that's a little bit about who he was. Says that his grandparents perhaps were identified as black or mulatto in the historical records, but they went to Chicago and they passed as white. So that's a very kind of, I think, interesting note in our modern world. The other thing that we learn a little bit about where he's from, and then we learn a little bit about the name that he chose. We're putting together our mind of who this man is. Where is he from? What's his ancestry? What's Chicago like? And again, I'm not going to give you a long history of Chicago, or he's a White Sox fan. What does that tell us? How old he is. He's 69 years old, raised in Dalton, Illinois, a devout Catholic family. And, I looked up his childhood parish. What do I know about this man, this new pope? I looked up his childhood parish. It's closed. It's closed, like so many Catholic churches. You think he's unaware of that? Of course not. He knows the hemorrhaging of the church. He knows the challenges of the church in America. He is deeply familiar with, undoubtedly touched in some way or another by the reality of the scandals. And I know that people are going to try to tar and feather him with, who knows what. He didn't do enough, or didn't do this, or didn't do that. Undoubtedly, he he has suffered from the effects of evil men, wolves in sheep's clothing, that have done so much almost indescribable damage to the church. But and whether he handled those circumstances that he may have found himself as a leader in perfectly, with our hindsight and kind of seeing things, but everything that I've read so far is that they went exactly by the protocols that were in place at the time. And so, I see a man who has a lot in common with me and many Americans, but what else do I see about him? I see that he had the faith from a very early age. He went to a high school seminary in the United States back when they still had high school seminaries. And the high school seminaries are gone now. They've been gone, and whether that's a good thing or not, I think that we're maturing a little later in life in the idea of making that kind of commitment. Although many people that went to high school seminaries did not end up going on further to theological studies. But ultimately, he went to Villanova, got a degree in mathematics, and became a priest and a missionary to Peru, dual citizenship with Peru. And, he studied canon law. Again, in Catholic theology, we want things to be as black and white as they can be, and at the same time, not to try to force things that are in the realm of mystery into a black or white category. So he has a doctorate. He was a teacher, and obviously, what else can we know about him? He was in the order of St. Augustine. And let me tell you, I hope and pray that as you listen to me say, what can we learn? How do you get to know Leo? Well, you get to know Leo by learning about St. Augustine. And the best place to learn about St. Augustine is to read the book, The Confessions of St. Augustine. Let me tell you, please listen to me, hear me carefully when I tell you, the Confessions of St. Augustine were a life-changing experience for me to read. I read that book and it resonated with my soul. It was one of those moments in life where I thought, I understand humanity and I understand myself better at the end of reading this book than I did before I read it. Okay, I still look back at my reading of St. Augustine's Confessions as one of those moments that was a major step in my life in the direction of becoming a priest, because it was a major step in my life in the direction of becoming really a much more grounded, rooted, dispelled some of the sort of the mystery of my journey to be a disciple of Jesus Christ, because I got to walk with St. Augustine on his journey through the temptations of the world and ultimately the victory of the grace of Christ in his heart. So what can you know about Leo XIV? He was a disciple, obviously, of Jesus Christ, but also of St. Augustine. Something else about Leo and St. Augustine that I think is just a little interesting tidbit is that Pope Leo X is who excommunicated Martin Luther. And Martin Luther was a member of the same religious order that, Robert Prevost was a member of. He was an Augustinian. And so Martin Luther so without a doubt, our new Holy Father is very much, aware of Luther and Lutheranism. And I was thinking about the Protestant Reformation and Lutheranism. And if you wanted to divide Protestants, and as I have said a few times, we really don't. One can't know what Protestants believe because nobody knows what Protestants believe. And I know that may sound a bit harsh, but there's just so many divisions in Protestantism. And obviously in Catholicism we don't have this monolithic thing going like we should have. When one becomes Catholic, they submit themselves to the doctrines and teachings of the church. We say that we believe that Jesus founded a church and that church is still with us today. Doctrines that are taught by the church are taught by Christ himself. That's what it means to be Catholic, and the doctrines and dogmas of the church are clearly spelled out for us, and those that cannot be clearly spelled out are given to us as mystery. And again, one of the things that we're challenged by with the legacy of Pope Francis is, that he allowed people to be confused about things that are not confusing. And so again, I'm hopeful that as our new Pope, aware of the Reformation, aware of Lutheranism, aware of Calvinism. That's the two, I would say, in my limited knowledge, the two great divisions of Protestantism is kind of a liturgical Protestantism that's sort of Lutheranism, and then you have this Calvinistic Protestantism that is just about every other kind of Protestantism is more Calvinistic. Although you can have mix and match in all different ways, but nonetheless. So who is this man, Leo XIV? Why did he take the name Leo XIV? Not because of Leo X, who excommunicated Martin Luther, but because of Leo XIII, who wrote a social encyclical called Rerum Novarum. And what happened in the world was we were moving, when Leo XIII was Pope, we were moving as a world from an agrarian society to more of an industrial society. And people were less and less people working on the farms, more and more people working in factories. And Leo XIII was very much about people need to earn a living wage, and that we can't simply treat human beings as human capital. We have to understand that human beings are unique in the economy, and that we can't simply be utilitarian about the human person. And one of the challenges when you were a farmer, when you grew your own crops and you worked hard and, you had a cooperative and this and that, well, now you're a laborer and you just work for a paycheck, and the transition in economy. And he wrote this document, Rerum Novarum, Leo XIII did, and about how human beings are treated in the modern economic system. And and again, we seek justice, we seek truth, we have the right. In fact, one of the things that Leo XIII did was he's very much against communism and the kind of rise of sort of this communistic idea, and even the state would own all the property and divvy out the property. He was against that, but he was very much for a living wage, which brings me back a little tiny bit to Mother's Day. And I was going to include this in my homily yesterday, but this weekend, but I didn't have time. But one of the challenges of moms staying home with their kids is the idea of our jobs really providing a living wage, and then how do we define what a living wage is? What is the lifestyle that we expect of our wages? So, what do we know about Leo the 14th? I tell you this, and again, who am I? I don't wear. I'm very rarely wear what we call a fiddleback vestment. Some of you will know what that is. That's like a pre-Vatican II vestment. And I saw a picture of Pope Leo wearing a fiddleback vestment with an amist. An amist is something that we wear. It's an optional thing. But one of the challenges in the liturgy in the post-Vatican II world was this oversimplification of things, even to the point of getting rid of some of these little details about church and liturgy and prayer that I think that I have seen, as I pay close attention, little tiny things, little tiny signals to me that that our new pope is not a liturgical minimalist, and I hope and pray that that turns out to be true. So, what do I think about our new pope? He's the pope. That's what I would say when people ask me about Francis. I would say he's the pope. And so I'm hopeful in the theological virtue sense of hope that God will see us through. I'm optimistic in the sense that I believe that He is what we need today, and I am prayerful that as His pontificate unfolds, there will be healing and renewal in the church, and that whatever the sufferings that the church is going to experience, because Jesus was very clear. Jesus talked about the fact that his body, the church, would suffer just as he suffered. And, Jesus suffered from the betrayal of Judas and others, and the church has suffered horribly from the modern Judases. And, and Pope Leo's going to experience some of that. There's no doubt. He already has. We all have. But God willing, the Holy Spirit will guide him with our prayers, helping along the way. Praise be Jesus Christ. Always be praised. And Hail Mary.